Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the All-Merciful, the Especially Merciful. I ask for mercy and blessings to be sent to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome to our Saturday Masterclass on why people embrace and leave Islam, organised jointly by ISB Campus and ISB. I will start by saying we pray and make dua for everyone affected by the COVID crisis. And of course, ask for Allah's mercy and blessings on everyone affected by the tragic killing of George Floyd. And we ask Allah to bless everyone who has made a commitment to learn and to do better from this. ISB takes representation seriously, and we pray that this opens up conversations about racism within all communities, including the British Muslim community, and empowers us to speak up against injustice, even if it be against ourselves. Batool Al Toma is the founder and current director of the Convert Muslim Foundation. She was previously the director of the New Muslims Project, where she established a UK-based service that has supported countless British converts. She is the editor of The Meeting Point, the magazine that is nationally recognised as unique for the convert Muslim community. Batool was also a member of the Cambridge Theology Board for the Contextualising Islam in Britain project, and was the principal lead on the narratives of conversion to Islam in Britain, female perspectives. She has produced and co-produced a number of reports on a range of topics relating to conversion to Islam in the UK. And mashallah, with all of this, she still finds time for 4 children and 4 grandchildren. So without further ado, I hand over to Auntie Batool to give us the context on the current situation of the Muslim and New Muslim community.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to come on board with this. Please don't listen to all that stuff that you heard before. I am getting to the age of being kind of old and decrepit at the moment, and possibly feeling that my contribution at this stage in my life is not as good or as able as it should be because of age and the fact that experiences are now different and changing so much for everybody in a very rapidly changing world. That said, we've all come through Ramadan and Eid, which has been extremely different. And of course, you know, this was my first Ramadan in 40 odd years to have been so totally different and so totally outside my experience as a Muslim. However, alhamdulillah, I have to say I found it very quiet, peaceful, and spiritually reflective. And there was no rushing about, which helped me so much actually to focus and to explore the inner meanings of what it is to be a Muslim and my relationship with God. And also, I think probably Eid was the hardest part, because I think Eid, we all want to break out of our isolation and share that time with our friends and families and neighborhoods and the mosque congregation. And we weren't able to do that. And that was particularly sad and difficult, I think, for everybody. At the moment, we're obviously having to deal with the fact that the isolation that we've all been experiencing for so many weeks now is under review and is slowly coming to a change wherein we're able to meet more people, possibly, although restricted in terms of where we can meet and how many, and social isolating and so on and so forth. But at least, alhamdulillah, there are changes, although it is worrying that the levels of deaths and people affected are not going down significantly enough to make us feel very comfortable or very positive about what's happening. We're also having to deal with the situation that occurred in America last week, and which has been occurring in America for way beyond last week's event. And I think it's so important for us. I personally was deeply traumatized by what happened, to the point where I have to say that I spent probably a day or 2 here at my computer, because I've been working from home, just constantly bursting into tears and crying and unable to restrain my grief, to be honest, because I felt that what we saw in front of us was a modern day lynching, played out in modern day sort of Hollywood drama or Hollywood style movie in front of our eyes. And so I spoke to my daughter who lives in LA last night, and she said to me, look, Mum, you know, you've got to go back. You've got to take this back as many years as you feel is necessary in order to learn from the history of everything that's happened, why the situation is the way it is right now. And so I thought that was a really good idea. And actually she sent me a link to a very important a piece of something that she felt I should watch, which was sorry, I'm just trying to bring it up on my phone, which was a lecture given at Cambridge University in 1965, and where the lecturer was speaking, a black speaker, James Baldwin, who debated with William F. Buckley. And I think if any of you want to start, you know, from a point of interest, I think that would be a good start, or even before then. He was an incredible speaker, and he spoke very eloquently about the situation in America.
Thank you for that. On the topic of going back, I'd like to ask you, from your own experience, maybe starting with your own story, what are some of the main reasons that you found that people embrace Islam for? What are some of the main things that draw them to it or make them question themselves?
Well, people have been drawn to Islam for a whole raft of reasons, and it's almost impossible to pin down, you know, the range of reasons and pin down one or two that are particularly significant. People have all sorts of reasons that occur in their lives, situations, events, and so on and so forth, that draw them towards exploring their own lives and the lives of people around them in order to educate themselves. And I think converting to Islam is a very long educational journey that so many people have embarked upon. It's interesting to note that somebody called Yassine Dutton, who is a convert to Islam himself, I think he lives in South Africa now, and he made a comment some time ago, which I thought was quite negative in one way, but obviously it depends on the experiences that he had in relation to why he made that comment. And he said, it's ultimately impossible to explain why people become Muslim, and more especially why they should remain so. Now, you know, obviously you can look at a comment like that and think, oh my goodness, what must have happened to have made him make a comment such as that? But I do feel that he probably went through some very relevant experiences to his own conversion that made him feel that that was a relevant remark to make. And I think that, you know, one of the saddest things, and we had it during Ramadan where we had all these conversion stories, and actually I've put them all up on our website, which is www.convertmuslimfoundation.org.uk. And it's this kind of, you know, sort of immediate adrenaline rush that people seem to want when they hear about people who have converted to Islam. And I think that converts themselves feel a little irritated by this, because they feel that we're kind of not here to give people a kind of sugar rush, a spiritual inoculation into reality, into sort of, you know, sort of suggesting to them that the reasons for my conversion should actually inspire you to do this, that, or whatnot. In fact, we all must come to Islam at some stage in our lives. We all must learn what it means to make our shahada in a meaningful and purposeful way, in the sense that, you know, making your shahada is about learning what it means to submit to Allah and to submit to the teachings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's very interesting that we get a lot of people who want to listen to conversion stories as though it's going to kickstart something in their lives that's going to make them a better Muslim, or is going to suddenly project them into this position where their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to be much deeper, much more meaningful, or whatever. We all have to make this journey. And lots of converts to Islam make this journey because, you know, some of them have been born and brought up in predominantly faith-centered families. And I think sometimes that comes as slightly surprising to the Muslim community, who sometimes think that we were all raised in the gutter and schooled with thieves. We weren't. In fact, you know, I'm just referring to my own story, and I'm sure there are many people who are listening, and I know that there are people who are listening whose stories would be very similar to mine, that I was brought up in a very God-conscious and God-centered family. And my parents were incredibly good people. In fact, I often say that they were better Muslims than many of the Muslims I know, and they weren't Muslim at all. And as a whole family, our projection in life was completely about, you know, belief in God, how our lives would be God-centered, and how our perspectives on life would always fall within the canopy within which our faith would guide and protect us. There are lots of people then who have difficulties with morality as it stands at the moment, and how moral compasses are sliding way off the kind of Richter scale, and whereby, you know, as Muslims, they feel that we need to refocus and readjust our moral compasses and bring them back to an understanding and a way of life that reflects that and reflects our interactive discourse with other people in the
Can I pick up on something you said before, which
Alex,
is which I found very interesting, which is that you definitely have kind of, I think, two very opposing reactions to a lot of converts. The first one is one absolutely that you mentioned, where people want to hear your story and almost try and feed off you in terms of spirituality, which is something I've definitely kind of seen and experienced. But then I've also found that when you talk to people about your experiences as a convert and of other converts, you also get this kind of other reaction of, why do they have so many problems, and why do they come to us with their problems? Is that something that you've kind of seen in terms of your experiences with the convert and non-convert community?
Of course, of course. And I think that the problem is that I think for most of the people who listen to converts to Islam talking about their conversion stories, the story is picked up from a point in the convert's life where they may have become interested in or influenced by or attracted by Islam. And that's not their story. That is just a minute part of their story. And so, you know, the audience comes into the life of the convert at a point where they themselves feel is the important part of that life story for them. However, I have learned as a convert to Islam that my life story started way, way back before then. And I think the disinterest that we have from people who listen to us about our convert stories is extremely disingenuous, because it really doesn't focus on, you know, our upbringing, our family life, our schooling, our socialization, our identity, all the things that have come together to shape this life. So, you know, it's almost like all of that is kind of lost. And although you are hearing of an event in our lives or a situation that might have occurred that has suddenly raised this interest in Islam, or brought about this interest in Islam, or this interest in a spiritual renewal or spiritual reconnection with God, which has now been achieved through Islam, that is not the whole story. And I think even as converts to Islam, when I work with converts to Islam, it's not just about hearing the person who comes into my room or calls me on the phone or comes to speak to me at a coffee house or something. It's not just about what happened 2 months ago or 3 months ago. It's about, I want to know about that person, where they were born, where they live, the geographical location, their family, their siblings, their parents, what they do, how they, what sort of interests, hobbies, and so on they have. In order for me to kind of understand the background or the push-pull factors that maybe they are dealing with in the greater extent of their lives.
Yeah.
What people don't understand when they hear that converts to Islam are sometimes experiencing problems. Those problems may have existed long before they came to Islam, may be part and parcel of the constant rejuvenation of life that we all go through in terms of our identity, in terms of the problems and problem solving, in terms of our community, race, our adolescence, the crises that we came up against during those times, doubts, intellectual problems, religious problems. There's so much in a person's life, and it seems disingenuous to reduce it, in fact, to that occasion and that particular situation.
I completely agree. And in fact, I tend to get very frustrated when I see that someone has taken their Shahada, and then immediately everyone takes out their cameras and wants to record the instant as if that person's entire life and experience, only like that instance, is the only bit that matters to you about this person. And I almost resent that when I see it. So as kind of
I think you'll often find as well, Alex, that if you talk to somebody they'll tell you about somebody who's converted to Islam, and they say, oh, her name is Samantha, or she's taken another name, which, sometimes is something that I would advise people not to do until they're much more confident in their knowledge about the faith as to whether to do or not to do that. But then I say to them, okay, so what's the family name? What's the full name? Oh gosh, I don't know. Do you know her name? No, I'm sorry. We just know her as Aisha. So to me, it says a lot that you don't really know the person. You know them from that specific incident that you witnessed or whatever, but really you don't know the person, and you didn't maybe make the effort to get to know them.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely very, very true. I completely agree. So I'm going to kind of amalgamate two questions here. One of them is, why is it then that a lot of reverts enter into Islam, but then also end up leaving a short while later? And related to that, I suppose, is, do you think that there is a difference in the way that a convert will look at Islam compared to someone who was maybe born into the Muslim community?
Well, Alex, could I just sort of backtrack just ever so slightly, to the sort of various different reasons why people come to Islam? There's one reason why people come to Islam, and it is a reason which has been immemorial, from time immemorial, and will continue to be that way. And the reason why I just want to mention it is because I think that we are reaching maybe a crisis point in our community and in our society where more of this will occur. And that's, we call it BFGF, the boyfriend-girlfriend situation. And that happens all of the time. And sometimes I get irate and maybe sometimes very emotional calls from Muslims from the heritage Muslim community here in the UK about the fact that their son or their daughter has met somebody who isn't a Muslim, and the crisis that this family is going through. And I often say to them, we are 3.5 million Muslims, if that, in the UK, in the midst of 65 million or 60 million at least non-Muslims. What are the chances? The chances are huge, and they are growing as we grow and live our lives here in the UK. And as we find that the ways and means of people, Muslims in particular, meeting people for marriage have declined, and old habits that used to be drawn upon by the Muslim communities are sort of falling by the wayside, and young people are not happy to go down these routes as much as they were. And they will often meet people at university, at college, in work, wherever it is. And these, you know, friendships are formed, and then relationships are formed. And this is something that I think, you know, we all as a Muslim community have to realize, and we all have to open our doors and open our hearts and open our minds to these situations and these circumstances. And as a convert community, we are trying our very best to try to accommodate these relationships, while at the same time encouraging the couples to know about Islam and to know about each other, and to know about the faith and the parameters of the faith, and to be able to live within the faith. And so I would also say to everybody who's listening, please don't slam doors. Please don't close communication and cut off relationships, friendships, love and family. Because whatever opportunity you have, you must take it in order that you can try to support these young people in their relationships and in their marriages. And unfortunately, now we are having a lot of young people coming together where the non-Muslim partner does not necessarily want to convert to Islam. And that, again, is another difficulty. But again, I would plead, please do not close doors, do not slam closed the doors of communication. You must keep them open, because, you know, history has, you know, fantastic ways of bringing people, even after several generations. If you look at a story like, Robert Rashid Stanley in Liverpool, who converted to Islam in, you know, the late 1900s, and then, you know, obviously passed away, and so on and so forth. And then his great-great-great-grandson converted to Islam in 1995, or in the mid-90s. And his family were so upset with him. And then, as they went through the family tree, they found his great-great-great-great-grandfather was also a Muslim. So please, let's never close the door. Let's always keep it open, inshallah. Now, you asked me about something, Alex, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. So I just asked you, why do you feel that reverts who tend to come into Islam and have so much kind of passion and energy for it end up leaving? And in fact, there's been quite a few good questions and responses on the chat to that. So that was one of them. Why do reverts tend to leave Islam? I think you covered one or two of the issues. And then there's also an interesting question here, which is, do you feel that we need specialist organizations to look after converts specifically, or do you think that maybe that's something that the community as a whole should be responsible for?
I think when people ask why do converts leave Islam, and you know, this is a very interesting area of study, and I think a lot of people should try to explore it a lot more deeply. What we want in Islam, and what we want as converts to Islam, and what every Muslim wants. In fact, you know, I mean, if you look at the whole situation within, if you look at the whole situation, sorry, a message came up on my screen. If you look at the whole situation in relation to Muslims here in the UK at the moment, and it's particularly young people, we're finding that there are a lot of people expressing doubts. We are coming to Islam as converts to Islam. We are coming to Islam in the great upheavals of geographical, political, social, and economic, and even personal well-being. There are great upheavals going on around the world, and particularly here in the UK. And in fact, you know, we are going to be faced with much more before we come through this coronavirus, Brexit, and all sorts of other situations. And so we're also dealing with a post-colonial culture, multicultural, racial, mainly secular Britain at the moment as well. And so there are lots of things coming together to cause a great deal of difficulty and consternation with young people. And so a lot of people who are finding difficulty with Islam are not just converts to Islam. There are people whose families have been Muslim for many, many years. And so they are also experiencing many of the problems and the situations that we ourselves are experiencing as converts to Islam. Sorry, I'm trying to turn off.
It's okay.
And I would have to say that a lot of this comes from the way that the upbringing that some of our young people have had, and for converts as well, that we have been introduced to an Islam here in the UK that has been kind of dominated and controlled by a particular people coming from a particular cultural background, where the Islam that they have implemented here in the UK doesn't necessarily sit comfortably. And a lot of converts to Islam have been feeling that for quite a long period of time. However, the children of those generational Muslims are beginning to realize that now. And the saddest thing is that we have allowed that cultural imposition of Islam and the way it ought to be lived here in the UK to be prolonged for far too long. And there has been no kind of there's been no sort of exercise in engaging with that Muslim community to the depths required in order to make change, or to see change as being an acceptable and necessary part of living life as Muslims here in the UK. And that's very sad. It's a very, unfortunate situation. And a lot of people young people who have doubts and who are leaving Islam are being brought up in very uncomfortable and awkward family situations where they have been forced through the eyes of needles in terms of living an Islam that is not spiritual, but mostly mechanical, really. And I think as converts to Islam, we have also experienced that. And we have a lot of converts to Islam who have left Islam because of experiences they've had with the Muslim community. And particularly because they've had very bad experiences in their family life and their marriages. Mm. Very unfortunate to hear converts to Islam saying that they would love to get married again, but definitely not to a Muslim, even if they themselves continue to practice Islam. Yes, and so this dry, prescriptive Islam that we have been handed down really needs to be addressed and looked at and examined for the fact that it is not an Islam that sits comfortably here in the UK. And it doesn't take into consideration the daily lives of Muslims in the UK and how we live them. And in fact, for converts to Islam, there is an area of fiqh. I know it's very new, it's not very old, and possibly a lot of scholars might disagree with it, but regardless, it is there. It's called fiqh al-kulliyat. It's called fiqh of minorities, where we are a minority. We are 3.5 million people living in a majority non-Muslim environment. And so why would we be going to places like Pakistan, Lahore, whatever it is, Saudi Arabia, the Arab world, and so on, to resolve problems that we are experiencing here in the UK, and where there is no concept of how these problems are impacting on us as Muslims in the UK. And this is a problem, and I think we need to look into it, and we need to look at the consequences and the impact of that on ourselves.
Yes, no, I completely agree. And I'm really glad that you touched on kind of the whole issue around marriage for converts, because I know that is a very difficult thing for a lot of converts to go through, to meet people, because there's no safety network often for converts.
No, I would also, but can I also say, Alex, that you know, when we try to talk to people who were converts to Islam and who have left Islam, we find it hard to engage with them because they really don't want to engage with us anymore, except for ex-converts who use their exclusivity of being ex-converts to sort of Quran bash us or to Muslim bash us at every opportunity. And I find that really distasteful, because I left Catholicism, I left Christianity, but I didn't go around Bible bashing people. You know, you move on, it's your choice, and move on, leave whatever happened behind and get on with your life in whatever spiritual milieu that you want, that you've chosen to do that. But I think we also have to understand and appreciate that during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, people actually left Islam. There were people who didn't remain Muslim and who decided to leave Islam for whatever reason. Now, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew these people. In fact, some of them were people he had sent to Abyssinia and who left Islam. And some of them were people who surrounded him in Mecca and who had left Islam. And he treated them with kindness and with compassion. And as I said before, this is what every Muslim needs, is compassion and empathy. And, you know, this whole idea that somebody who apostates or leaves Islam should, you know, sort of suffer, you know, the ultimate consequences of losing their lives is totally ridiculous and doesn't apply to this situation at all. And in fact, there was Abdullah ibn Khalaf, was one of the apostates, and Rabia ibn Umayyah, she apostated during the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab. And then there was somebody called Hisham and Ayash, who also, two young men who apostated. And, you know, there is a verse in the Quran that came about this situation, which is said, say, "O those who have transgressed against themselves, do not despair of God's mercy, for God forgives all sins, for he is the all-forgiving, the most merciful. Trust in your Lord and submit to him before the chastisement comes to you, and after that you shall not be helped." Of course, that was suggesting that please do come back to Islam, please do rejoin the fold, because we want you to die as Muslims, and we want you to die with your shahada on your lips. And again, it's not about, you know, sort of shutting the door on people when they have moved away from the mosque or moved away from the Muslim community. It's about following that person. It's about, prolonging the links and the friendships and the links that have been made with that person, and keeping the ties in order that, you know, the heart may be opened again, and that you can be, you know, part and parcel of the means of bringing that person back into Islam. And we have had lots of situations where people have died in the Muslim community and have been buried as non-Muslims because the Muslim community have failed in their duties and responsibilities to that person, and allowed them to go away and not followed up on their care, their supervision, their support, their help, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I was wondering, can I take you back to the cultural aspects that you're talking about that can be forced upon a lot of reverts? So, for instance, I know from experiences of people that I have met that often when they marry into families, the family have this idea that white culture doesn't exist, and so therefore they're a blank canvas for the family's culture to be put on, and there is often an expectation that you are suddenly meant to become Arab or become Pakistani, dependent on where the family you're marrying into, their culture, or even sometimes the masjid where you revert into is from. Is that something that you have come across, and if so, do you think that there is a way that we need to be addressing this as the Muslim community?
A lot of that has to do with post-colonialist history, and also has to do with almost like a kind of a sort of reversion in a sense, reverse racism, in a sense that our culture is more superior to yours. And it's very difficult when you're speaking with a young couple who wish to get married and you feel that you want to try to ensure that the person, the convert to Islam who's going into that marriage, and it generally happens more with women than it does with men. Women are considered to be coming into the family, and so are being absorbed into a Muslim family. And so, you know, they are taking on more of the cultural reflections of that family in terms of dress, in terms of cuisine, cooking, and the way things are done, and how the culture almost supersedes the Islam in a sense. But it's all about trying to talk to them about the fact that they must start off their married life with mutual understanding, mutual respect, and mutual love, and that no one is superior or inferior. Because as we all know, starting a marriage is difficult in so many different circumstances, but starting a marriage where one side of the couple or the family of that partner feels that they are superior to the other person and their family is going to be a very difficult footing to start off any marriage. But I'm, you know, it's a very difficult one, and we have to have empathy with the situation. But I think as Muslims, born Muslims, we have to really think about what we're doing here, and we have to reflect on how that impacts on the person that you're bringing into the marriage or into the family fold, and respect for that person and respect for their family, even though they are not Muslim. And you see, this is the whole issue as well about the cultural expression of Islam here in the UK. It doesn't suit converts to Islam. Even the way we run our mosques and the way we you know, create segregation in our mosque does not suit the convert Muslim community. Because as a convert Muslim, you are wanting to enter the mosque freely and comfortably. And you would also like to take a non-Muslim family member, somebody who's supporting you in your religious change and the journey that you're on. And you want to take that family member with you, whether it's a mom, a dad, a sibling, whatever it is, male or female, brother or sister. And yet at the door, you know, you are expected to part company. Now, it's just not acceptable. So the whole idea of this segregation is something that has been enforced on the Muslim community. And in fact, it has, you know, done huge damage to the Muslim community in its entirety.
I just want to, so someone has asked a question here about asking what mosques can do to support Muslim converts. And I'd like to say that, first of all, thank you so much for asking that, because one of the issues that I think I have definitely seen is a lack of interest and a belief that converts should just absorb themselves into the current workings of mosques. So thank you very much for asking that. So Auntie Batool, what do you think we as individuals and as a community, so people who run mosques, who run groups, can do to help Muslim converts and to support them?
Okay, so first of all, you know, in the beginning I was talking about the Muslim community as it is in the circumstances that we find ourselves here in Britain today and around the world indeed. And one of the really disappointing things that I found was when we were, you know, facing this coronavirus thing and the need to isolate and the need to close down public spaces and so on, was the lack of leadership and the total and absolute chaos that arose everywhere, all over the country, about the closing of mosques, the immediate need to close mosques. People were hanging back. Leadership was nowhere to be found. It seemed like utter chaos. Again, when the situation occurred, when washing of bodies, which might be detrimental to people who might have to wash bodies, or if particular mosques or particular Muslim groups didn't accept the fact that the washing was not entirely necessary and that the body could be buried without the washing. You know, there was so much conflict that went on in that particular situation. And so mosques and organizations, we are emerging out of this whole situation with, I hope, a whole new, you know, idea of how our communities ought to be run and should be run, and a whole new attitude to life and to life here in the UK and all over the world. And so it's all about how are we going to open ourselves up and be much more welcoming, compassionate, empathetic, accommodating, facilitating to our entire community, not just the converts to Islam, to our entire community, even particularly for women. How are we going to allow the rereading of the Quran and Hadith in relation to women's, you know, inclusion in mosques, and not just in, you know, sort of inappropriate spaces that are inappropriate for any human being to occupy, not least to pray in. And so the mosques and the whole community are having to emerge from this whole situation with a different outlook, with a different attitude, a different set of behaviors. What can we do, particularly for converts to Islam? At the moment, the organization that I've established has been established on the basis that the convert community, we are now, you know, we are now at a stage where we have lots of converts in our localities, around our mosques, visiting our mosques, learning at our mosques, who can themselves establish support for converts to Islam. And they will know best how to support the convert to Islam. And if the mosques are particularly interested in supporting that, then allow the converts in your mosque to set up some kind of surgery, some kind of service provision in the mosque for the converts in your local area, to encourage them to be able to come, to include them in mosque activities, to help them to, you know, to raise their profile, to help them to learn and to, you know, to get the sort of knowledge they need in order to give them the confidence to be fully fledged Muslims within that Muslim community, and to be confident in themselves, in what they believe in amassing enough education and knowledge for themselves to be able to live their Islam without constantly being dictated to or criticized or pulled back on every occasion or for every situation.
Thank you for that. I think I want to ask something now, which I feel slightly mixed upon, which is, do you think that it should be reverts running and leading programs for reverts? Because I think on the one hand, it is vitally important that we involve the born Muslim community and the native Muslim community in supporting us and in creating those mixed spaces that are available for everyone. But on the other hand, I think that the convert community has been ignored and trivialized for so long that maybe we do need to start up our own programs and our own spaces. What do you think about this kind of issue?
I think, first of all, you will find that people who have found it difficult to deal with the way our the way our mosques have sort of prevented our inclusion. I'm not just talking about converts to Islam. I'm talking about women. I'm talking about young people. I'm talking about, you know, lots of people. I'm talking about convert Muslims, particularly from the African, Caribbean, and West Indian communities, who, you know, who have all experienced attitudes and have been curtailed by gatekeepers who have deliberately prevented their inclusion in the mosque and their involvement in the mosque. And you will find that a lot of these groups have preferred to establish a third space, a space outside of the mosque for themselves, so that they are able to meet comfortably, enjoy, you know, the diversity of their group or their, you know, their organization, and to be able to meet comfortably and even without segregation. And so, unfortunately, the mosque has lost, you know, access to these people, and that's very unfortunate. And these people would feel that they have lost access to the mosque, even though they will continue to go there and continue to pray there. That's about as much as they can do. And the unfortunate thing is that, you know, these mosques that are established within our communities have been built on the backs of, you know, funding collected from communities for the community, to serve the community. And by the same token, they are divided along sectarian lines that mean that other people cannot join in, or other people are made to feel that they cannot join in. And so these third spaces have been established. Now, if converts to Islam, these third spaces are usually, you know, rented places, rented spaces, coffee houses, you know, comfortable community centers and so on, where people feel they can run their activities without being necessarily dictated to by the mosque governance. And so sometimes, you know, you will hear people saying, oh, you know, why don't we have a mosque of our own? And I have always been, as a convert to Islam, against establishing mosques for converts, because that's not what Islam is about. It's not in the spirit of Islam. Even when we hear about mosques for women, I don't think it's in the spirit of Islam. Yet I appreciate and understand the lengths to which people are driven in order that they feel that that's the last resort and that's all they can do. And so it's so difficult for people to establish these places. And I feel that, you know, we can learn so much from the Muslim community. We don't necessarily want to part from that. And we do, and while I think it's important for converts to Islam to establish their own streams of support and help and all the rest, I do feel that we can and we should get help from the rest of the Muslim community, and we should accept that help graciously and involve as many people as possible. However, when you have a Muslim community that itself is struggling with all of the problems and the issues and concerns that they have, then as converts, I don't think we now, at this point in our conversion sort of stories and experiences, that we expect help and support. And really, I'm also working at the moment with people who have converted to Islam in prison. And there's a huge numbers of people who are converting to Islam in prison, particularly from the African, Caribbean and West Indian communities. But they again are being, you know, sort of harnessed by an Islam that culturally doesn't fit with them and with their upbringing and their, you know, backgrounds and culture, because again, it is generally an Asian cultural expression of Islam that you will find in prison, because unfortunately we have possibly, you know, between 10 and 15,000 of our young Asians of all age in prisons in the UK, which are totally sort of supported by a Muslim chaplaincy sector, which is 99.9% Deobandi trained and, you know.
Right,
so,
inshallah. So
yeah.
in the last couple of minutes that we've got, I was wondering, can we do some quick fire? Because mashallah, we've had so many great questions that I think I'd love to get answered before the end of this session. Is that okay with you, Auntie?
Yes, yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay, so one of the ones that came early on is, why do reverts change their name when they become Muslim?
In my time, I would have said, because we were totally sort of ignorant of that sort of situation, and I would have changed my name. It's to do with, you know, you want to fit in, you want to be part and parcel of this Muslim community that you have really struggled to find and struggled to enter into, because you've had a lot of objection from family and friends, and you know, all sorts of situations. So you know, your journey has been very ropey, it's been very bumpy, and you know, you want to feel part and parcel of this community. And the suggestion is that, you know, you should change your name because now you're a Muslim and you should reflect that in your identity, and part of your identity is your name, and so on and so forth. Of course, the Prophet ﷺ did not do that, and we should learn from that. And we would always advise people, please don't change your name. At least don't change it now. Please,
Yes, yeah.
Take some time. And if you'd like to slot in a name into your existing name, then by all means do so, or whatever. But we sometimes have real issues and real problems with people whose name is different to their official name as it appears in their passport. And for traveling and visas and Hajj and Umrah, it can be a minefield.
Yes, no, I completely agree.
Say, please don't change your name. As well as that, it's about respecting your parents. You know, your parents gave you a name, and your name, you know, the names that parents give their children are never derogatory names. They're always names that have good connotations, good meanings, and so on and so forth. So please think very carefully before you do such a thing.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think often I know that I have been told, why haven't you changed your name? Because I've kept my name, which is Alex, upon conversion. I've been asked what's my Muslim name, as if my name is somehow not a Muslim name. So I think a lot of times it's kind of the pressure, and the assumption is that you should change it.
You will also hear lots of names from Urdu, from Malay names, Turkish names that have been absorbed into this Muslim community and Muslim culture and country and so on. So I remember years ago being on Umrah, I think it was, yes. And it was the time when you had to get a bus from Mecca outside the Haram. You had to get a bus, you had to get tickets for the bus, and the bus took you to Medina. And I had a lot of converts to Islam with me. And I had somebody called Terence Pearson. I had somebody called, Linda Bargate. I had somebody called Erica Timoney, who I'm sure lots of you know. And then I had somebody called Abdul Karim McLaren. And I gave the guy the names, and he was trying to write in Arabic, Terence Pearson, and so on. And when I said Abdul Karim McLaren, he said, MashaAllah. And everybody was trying to change the names of the people on Hajj, on the Umrah at the time. And Linda's name, they were saying to her, well, why don't you call yourself Aisha? And she said, well, why can't I just call myself Linda? And but it's not a Muslim name. And she said, well, let's make it one. And so I think we should make them all Muslim names.
No, I completely agree. Okay, so back to quick fire questions. This is, I think, a really poignant one. Do brown converts suffer more abuse or domestic violence from their birth families, and are invisible even among the convert community? Do you feel that is an issue? Do you think that there is still racism that goes on from reverts as a whole and within the groups of reverts that exist?
I certainly think converts to Islam from the Black African Caribbean and West Indian Muslim communities do suffer racism, even within our own community of Muslims, and particularly within mosques. And I think it's absolutely disgraceful, and I think it's something that we really need to look at. And because of the situation in America, and it really shouldn't take a situation in America in the last week for us to stand up and to really look at ourselves, take a good hard look at ourselves in terms of how we treat people who enter our mosques, regardless of where they're from. And it's not just that. I mean, even converts to Islam from the Hindu Sikh communities. This is all about history from, you know, the Asian communities and, you know, colonization, everything, which has been brought over to the UK, which has been played out, you know, in our mosques and in our communities still. And the only unfortunate thing about the Sikh and Hindu community is that as converts to Islam, we often don't recognize them because they are, you know, Asian, and they sort of are absorbed into the Asian community without the Asian community necessarily appreciating the struggles that they have gone through. And believe me, the struggles, I think, for them are possibly harder for us. And we have to stand up and call these things out. And the African, Caribbean and West Indian community, definitely we have to address this. I've already spoken to some people about setting up a sort of a discussion focus group about these things and how we can address them. But I think it's not just the time yet. I think there's lots of knee-jerk reactions to what's happening, but we need to establish this where the conversations are led, the narratives are given time to be told, and then there's agendas are set and time spans are given to change and to see change being implemented.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, so I think this is a good question. Do you know of any specific revert groups within the UK that people can either attend to meet other reverts or support if they feel that they can?
There are lots all over the UK, and they're being held in various different, you know, one of the marvelous things about the Convert Muslim, you know, support network is that since I started in the Islamic Foundation in 1993 with the New Muslims Project, there have been many, many localized support groups set up in Leeds, in Bradford, in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, in Manchester, Liverpool, you know, all over the country. And these are very active, and they are looking after the basic needs of converts within the community setting. And that ideally is the best place to be providing that support, because that is the place where in the convert to Islam will begin to interact with the Muslim community and be able to involve themselves and become actively supportive of the work that's been done generally within the community. And so I ask everybody to try to support these small groups of convert-led, you know, initiatives that are supporting the convert. If anybody wants to get in touch with me privately, please do so. It's info@convertmuslimfoundation.org.uk, inshallah, and we can direct you to it. Obviously now with the corona situation, you know, things are on lockdown, but we're doing lots of classes, lots of online opportunities, events, and you know, situations that people can add into or come into.
So one person has asked, how many converts or reverts do you know that have left Islam? I can answer first if you are thinking of them. So I personally do know of many people who have embraced Islam, and then through struggles with their family situations, through struggles with the community, through the lack of acceptance that they have found within the Muslim community, through the lack of help that they have found within their local Muslim community, have left Islam because they found that there is more support for them once they leave Islam than there is when they join.
I personally don't know many. I would say I could count them on one hand. However, you know, they are out there. But as I said, you know, there are people who left Islam during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That doesn't mean that we should take it lightly. And it means that for every person who has left Islam, we have failed in ourselves, in our ability to be able to help them, to look after them, to be able to understand the difficulties that they're experiencing, and to, you know, if there's nothing we can possibly do to stop them from leaving, to allow them to leave, but to continue to support them and befriend them and walk with them. That's the important thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think we'll take one more question, maybe two or three. So what do you think we can learn from other countries in the way that they have responded to converts. So the person who's asked the question has said that the Muslim community in South Africa, for instance, has been there for 7 generations now.
Has been there for the convert community?
Yes, yeah.
MashaAllah. That is fantastic. And I don't have any experience of the South African situation. So I couldn't really tell you. All I can say is, look, there's one area of zakat that is mentioned in the Quran, which is about reconciling the hearts. And generally speaking, Sheikh al-Qaradawi, Sheikh al-Judea, all of the scholars in Islam say that this is about converts to Islam and trying to ease their journey as best we can, and to try to offer whatever we can to soften their hearts and to take them in out of situations where maybe they are having deeply difficult family trauma for the fact that they have chosen to become Muslim. Do we get any support from the community about, in relation to this? No. Do we get any support from the aid organizations who see the work that we're doing in the small organizations all around the country, or in organizations like myself? Does anybody come to us and say, look, we are setting aside this amount of money for this particular issue, because it's part of the 8 conditions, or the 8 recipients of zakat mentioned in the Quran. We're setting aside this amount of money. Can you please present us with the projects you want to do so that we can fund this situation? No. So what do we do? What are we meant to do? I remember going to Singapore in 1995. I was in Malaysia and I thought, I need to go to Singapore. There's an organization called Dar al-Arqam there. In 1995, I went to visit it. It was a huge building. There were about 40 people working there, and it was all about supporting converts to Islam. They had their own courses. They had their own, initiatives. They had, all this support network and everything. I was back in the Islamic Foundation by myself. And at that time, it was just 3 years after setting up, we had little support. It was beginning to emerge. There was fledgling support at that time. But compared to that experience, I was completely devastated when I saw that and saw everything they had. But then again, it was run by the Waqf and the Islamic, authority there. And so funding was not a problem. But it really is a problem. And I really find it so distressing, actually, that, we've gone through a Ramadan now, and in spite of how much we tried, the funding that came in was minimal, really.
No, I completely agree. I know a lot of examples where, I know one particular example, in fact, where one family, a single mum who was a revert with 5 children, she went to the masjid and she said, I don't have the money to pay my rent this month. Can you help me in any way so I don't become homeless? And the masjid point blank refused any kind of assistance for her, and she ended up being kicked out of her flat that month with her 5 children, because the masjid were not willing to help support her in any way. I think
what we're trying to do, what I would like to do, is, because the convert community are growing in capacity, in size, and so on, I'm trying to impress the importance upon the convert community of supporting our own work and trying to make it independent, so that we can look at ourselves and look at our journeys and look at our experiences and say, I do not want somebody to go through the same as what I did. So I am going to invest in this organization, or invest in this local support network, or invest in whatever it is I can see in order to make the journey different for somebody else, a joyful one, full of compassion, full of empathy, and where you are embraced into the Muslim community. So I would call on all converts to Islam, please, please look at our own organizations now and see, what the possibilities are of reaching that goal.
I completely agree. And just very quickly to finish up, do you think that reverts should be kind of put into more positions of power within our masjids, within our bodies, to try and help create this diversity of awareness and of opinions, especially in our masjid boards?
I remember back on the life and the training that I had from a really wonderful, wonderful man, Ustad Khurram Murad, Allah yarhamu, who, you know, I was very fortunate to be part and parcel of, you know, the training that he gave us when we were, well, I wasn't that young, but, you know, but it was when I came to Islam relatively early at that time. And he always said that in this country, here in the UK, Islamic organizations, mosques, initiatives were never going to, you know, sort of really reach their potential without a diverse governance that reflected the Muslim community as we have it here in the UK in its diversity, including converts to Islam. And so I have to, you know, I have to say that it is shameful that many of our mosques in most of our cities around the UK do not reflect the diversity of their community. But again, then they're divided along sectarian lines. So what can we do? But I really do feel a hope that coming out of this Corona thing and trying to build a new world and bring about a new dawn and a new day, that these kind of situations will be addressed.
Thank you so much, Auntie Batool. And I hope if anyone is interested, remember to check out the Convert Muslim Foundation. I follow you guys on Facebook, mashallah, and I did some of the Ramadan programs that you offered. They're really beneficial and they're like brilliant. And if you can support them financially, fantastic. And if you can support them by sharing the work they do, fantastic as well. I think we're going to have to bring it to a conclusion there. So thank you so much for giving us your time this evening. Thank you so much. And inshallah, I will finish with Surah Al-Asr. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope you have a very pleasant evening.